Hi, I'm Chris Moon from Lower Austria. I love to combine my passions for videography, travel and adventure bikes. That's why I created the YouTube channel chris.moon.travels.
Welcome to the Real Riders Podcast. My name's Simon Josie, and if this is your first time here, welcome and thanks for listening. Chris Moon is a fellow podcaster as well as a filmmaking adventure motorcyclist, and thus was always going to be someone I wanted to interview. I've mentioned his German language podcast here previously, but today we're strictly talking about his filmmaking experiences. Just to let you know, I'm hoping to publish 2 more episodes of Real Riders before the Lightweight Adventure Festival takes place in the middle of July. The festival is being held in the English Peak District from the 12th to the 14th of July. As I've mentioned previously, I'll be attending, and the last post I saw from the organisers indicated that tickets are fast selling out. Get yourself along to www.lightweightadventurers.co.uk to secure a ticket, assuming they haven't all sold out by the time you hear this. As always, if you have the time and inclination, please consider rating or liking the Real Riders podcast in your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. This will help other listeners find the podcast. The podcast has accounts on multiple social media channels, but I generally only post to them whenever new episodes of the podcast drop. Please feel free to repost, reskeet and retweet to help get the word out there about the podcast. A list of the Real Riders socials can be found in the episode notes. Righto then, let's get to my talk with Chris. Hi Chris, or should I say servus. Welcome to the podcast and thanks for being my guest for this episode. How are you this evening?
Hi Simon, thank you very much for having me. I'm doing great. Just finished my regular day job and happy to be here with you.
Great. Now look, from Instagram, it seems that you were out motorcycling this weekend. Do you want to tell me about that?
Yeah, this weekend I was joining the Austrian Adventure Bike meeting, which is being organized by a very good friend called Martin. And it was a 4-day meeting with, let's say, adventure bikes. So it was partly on-road and off-road tours, but also campfire. Some tents were built up, some slept in huts, and it was just a community meeting with some friends and some new people. So it's quite a small event, so 60 people.
What part of Austria was that? Did it take place in?
So that was Lower Austria, so that's in the eastern part of Austria, and in that region it's quite up north, close to the Czech border.
Okay. And can I presume correctly that Martin is the same Martin that you've done a number of tours with that we see in the YouTube videos?
You're absolutely right. You've done your research. Yeah, Martin, in the meantime, is a very good friend. I've known him for several years now, but our relationship got a little bit closer. I think it was probably last year when we did the ACT UK and Ireland tour together. So we have done 2.5 weeks, and we also did a YouTube series about this trip.
And I guess to keep Martin happy, you might want to just give him a shout out and tell everyone what his Instagram handle is so that everyone could go follow him as well.
Yeah, definitely. You should check out Martin. He's called Wall Spins As Fast As We Ride. He's mainly on Instagram, but also Facebook. He has a homepage, but check out Instagram, I would recommend.
Right. Okay, let's get started with talking about how you got into motorcycling. Now, I can imagine if Austria is anything like Germany, getting your motorcycle license is a serious commitment, both in terms of time and money. Tell us, how did you get into motorcycling?
Well, it's quite a funny story. So I think I already started to love motorcycle when I was a small child, but I was never really allowed to have a motorcycle, or as we call it, with 125cc, the moped. I was never allowed to do the small moped license. So actually, we had some pocket bikes and some not really road legal engine-powered vehicles back at home, but it was not really allowed to go on the road with that kind of stuff. So when I moved away from home and I did the civil duty year, I was at the ambulance station where a few guys had motorcycles. So we came up with the idea to, together with a second colleague, after our shift, we joined the motorcycle class in our ambulance gear. And that's how I started to do the license. I only told my mother when I was already in the class, so she couldn't stop me from doing it. And I did the same thing when I bought my first motorcycle. I only told her when I already paid the motorcycle. So that's how I got into it. The first motorcycle was quite a road-oriented small bike because I'm quite a tall guy, and it was a Kawasaki Ninja 250R, I think. And back then, I soon got some back pain from riding that small bike. It's also, you have to lean quite forward riding this bike. And I started to do some longer day trips. So after 2 years with that bike, I bought a BMW F800 GS, which is, I think the main reason was the touring orientation and the upright seating position, and of course a little bit more horsepower. But this bike, which I bought probably also more for on-road, led me into off-road riding and also motorcycle traveling. And that's how the whole thing started. Then, a little bit later, a bigger GS, a 1200 GS Adventure followed, then a KTM 790 Adventure R, and now let's say the last one is the Husqvarna Norden Expedition.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because I'd sort of done some sleuthing around, and I saw in your YouTube channel you had a playlist that was sort of devoted to BMW R1200 GS Adventure, and I haven't seen you riding one of those, and I sort of put two and two together and thought, I bet Chris once upon a time had a BMW R1200 GS Adventure, and you've just confirmed that. But tell us, was there any specific reason why you didn't persist with the really large adventure bikes? Why you dropped down to the smaller the KTM first, and now the Norden? I think the Norden's just about 900 cc, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. Well, when I had the 800 GS, I just felt like after some time it was not exciting enough anymore. And I was also at a quite young age, and I think there was just a wish to have the powerful 1200 engine, boxer engine everyone is talking about. And I also like the looks of the bike, actually. And that's why I got the 1200 GS Adventure. I even shipped that one from Hamburg in Germany to Chile, South America, and I did 4 months of traveling in South America with that BMW GS, and we even did some quite challenging routes, like I think it's called the Lagoon route in Bolivia, and that is really, I think, probably the max you can do on a 1200 GS Adventure. I thought the bike will fall apart on this route, but it did it all, so it's possible. But I guess it's just more fun if you have a bike which is a little bit lighter and also has a bigger diameter of the wheels. So the GS has, I think it's 19 inch at the front and 17 at the back. And the Norden and also the KTM, they have 21 front and 18 inch at the rear. And also I like the low center of gravity from the Norden and also the KTM 790. So I feel like this is the perfect middle for an adventure bike, because you can do both, let's say, twisties, Dolomites, alpine road touring, but also off-road trips like the TET or ACT. You can also go to the enduro park. So I love to have one bike which covers everything.
You mentioned you were in South America. I have to ask, that prompts a question. Where are the videos of that trip?
Well, I think before that trip, I even bought a GoPro Hero 4, I think, back at that time. And I also had a bridge camera and a smartphone. And I remember probably of those three cameras, the smartphone did the best recordings and pictures. And I was really at the beginner level back then. But I was not really happy with the quality of the GoPro and also the big camera. I'm not sure if it was even able to record in 4K. Probably the phone also not at that time. Also, I struggled with the video editing, and yeah, I sort of gave up on doing videos back then. I think I did a few vertical Instagram stories, and I think there weren't even reels at that time. But I did some pictures, and later I think I even sold the GoPro. And I always felt like having a new smartphone every 2 or 3 years. That the phone cameras were so good that it felt like obsolete having a big camera or a GoPro. But this changed quite some years later. I think it was 2021 when I thought again, well, I want to give it another try. I would really love to do some YouTube videos or some travel documentation. And I remembered all this stuff about the different cameras. And I said, okay, if I try this again, I want to really do high quality videos like some other YouTubers I love to watch. And so I got just the newest GoPro, a Sony full frame camera, and then a new iPhone, because it was also important to me to always have a good camera in your pocket, even if you're out walking somewhere and maybe you're not on a bike. So and a drone, yeah, I think it was the DJI Mini 3 Pro. So combining 4 different cameras, I gave it another try. And it takes some time. You have to watch a lot of tutorials, and it's a lot of work, but I still enjoyed it doing those videos. And when you load those up to YouTube and you get some feedback, that always motivates to go on. But you really have to have a lot of passion to even get this going, because it just takes so much research, learning, and time. So yeah, that's why most people don't really do the editing stuff.
Yeah. Going back to the initial YouTube channel videos, I was going to ask you why the 3 series you've put up there have been based on trips that are quite far from home. You've been to Scandinavia, you've been to Gran Canaria in the Spanish Canary Islands, and then Great Britain. And I know also that you were on the Channel Islands in France quite recently, earlier this year. It begs the question, what made you choose those destinations? And, are there not good touring destinations closer to home?
Well, there are definitely a lot of great touring options. I think I would really call it touring options in Austria. The Alps are not too far away from my place, but I'm riding now motorcycles since 2009. So I did quite a lot of touring quite early in the local area in Austria and maybe some neighboring countries. And then also going to South America in 2018. The local trips, which are really close to my place at home, they don't really excite me anymore. So maybe when the spring comes, I would do 1 or 2 twisty tours around Lower Austria, but that's enough. Nowadays, I really want to do travel in faraway places, and also what is really important to me now is to combine some on-road with some off-road. So I really enjoy nowadays doing some TED tracks, doing some ACT. And also at the event last weekend, we also had some local off-road tracks included. And if I can combine this with some nice video shooting, then it's the best thing to do for me.
Are there ACT or TET trails or tracks through Austria?
Not really. So there is a TED linesman for Austria, but there is no track, or at least no public track. And the reason is probably that it's not really legal. So there are some, let's say, some off-road tracks or tracks through the woods or fields where there is no prohibition sign. So you could think it's legal to go there, but it's not really legal. So unless it's private or you know the owner and have the permission to go there, yeah. So basically, all the people from Austria, they go to Southeastern Europe, so Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, but also Albania, Greece. So in the most countries, more southern direction, it's legal, but not really in Austria. There are a few tracks you can go. Sometimes you also have to pay a few euros to ride some mountain passes, but that's it. So it's not the best location or not the best country to go off-road.
Yeah. I know that you're participating in the, is it the Rally of Bosnia or the Bosnian Rally quite soon? Yeah. But if I was to ask you, what would be your sort of dream destination? What would that be now?
Well, that's a difficult question. I think before I went to South America, I always had the dream to go from maybe Vienna to Southeast Asia or maybe to India. So to do quite an exotic long distance trip or even do a round the world trip. And the reason we went to South America was that I was going with a good friend, and he did a lot of backpacking trips through Asia in the past already. So he didn't really want to go to Asia. And we were considering going maybe from Vienna to Cape Town in South Africa or going to South America. So, and then we talked to some friends, family, and everyone warned us not to go to Africa, which is, it's probably quite more challenging to go there, but it's still possible. And I know some people who have done it, but also from the pure bureaucracy, so you don't need to have the Carnet de Passage. There's quite a known shipping route from Hamburg to Chile with a collective container shipping, 10 or 20 bikes in one container. So it's quite easy to ship your bike to Chile and tour around South America, and there's less visas and stuff necessary. So that's why I went there. But if you ask me about my dream destination, I'm not sure if I nowadays would really need to do such a long distance trip. So going to some countries which are not neighboring countries and combining that with some off-road, even if it's still Europe, is exciting me. Well, actually, there's one dream I have. It would be going to North America, and I think it's called a BDR, Country Discovery Routes. It's probably something similar to the TET.
Yeah. One of my earlier guests, Brent Pearson, talked a little bit about it because I think he's done the Idaho one. And he says when he gets a bit older and is, finds the challenging stuff maybe a bit physically hard, that's when he'll do more of the backcountry discovery routes in the US. So he's saving those up for later. And from what I've seen, I mean, it looks amazing, looks gorgeous. It looks like a filmmaker's paradise because there are, compared to Europe, shall we say, relatively few restrictions on where you can fly drones. There's not much traffic, so you can set up your camera for ride-bys and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of really impressive footage out there of those tracks. But from what I've heard, they're not as technically challenging. Yeah.
Well, I think there's also a nice YouTube channel. I don't recall the name now, but it's a guy traveling, I think, on a 1200 or 1250 GS. He did some camping on the BDR and has a nice YouTube channel. So that was quite inspiring. But also there are some nice videos from places like Moab or Joshua Tree National Park. I don't really know all the areas. I haven't done extensive research, but that's something I really would love to do.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's something about particularly those of us in Europe, where with our denser population here, there's something kind of very appealing about those big wide open spaces and lack of people. That's quite appealing, I think, about the US.
Yeah, totally agree. That's also maybe a reason I love to go to Scandinavia, because it's also, there's less population density and the wild camping, the nature. Yeah, so totally agree.
And no bears, which is the thing that you have to consider, I guess, and other larger creatures in North America. But yeah, one sort of final question I want to ask you about riding, which is, if you were to describe for me the characteristics of a perfect ride, what would those characteristics be?
So the perfect ride for me, that is definitely something which is more than a day ride. So probably it should be at least a week of traveling, or best thing would be even to go up to 3 months. So I think if you're having the standard vacation of 2 weeks, that's sometimes too short to even, let's say, switch off your mind from your everyday work. So I think 3 weeks is a good start. That's also something I plan for August, going on a 3-week trip. But probably up to 3 months and not longer than 3 months. It should be a country which is, yeah, maybe not exactly close to your home place. So at least another country. It should be an area where not the average tourist goes. So it should be really going to places the regular tourist can't go. Exploring some remote areas, or some areas where you need to have some kind of off-road skills to even get there. So those are the kind of things which would be the dream destination. It would be going in a small group, so maybe just 2 people, maybe with my girlfriend, or maybe 1 or 2 really good friends, but not in a bigger group. Yeah, you have to do a lot of compromises if you go in bigger groups. And then, of course, this group also has to share the same passion for motorcycle traveling. They have also to share the passion for photo or videography, because, if you do those video stops and you see the other people are just waiting for you to go back on the bike, this will also reduce the experience. So, but I wouldn't even narrow it down to a specific country or place. It could be pretty much anywhere. Just going to a remote area and experience something new, being out in the nature. Yeah.
Are you the kind of person who, when you can't ride during the winter, are you spending a lot of time looking at maps and looking at routes and watching other YouTube videos to get an idea of what a good destination, what a good trip could be?
Well, I think there's 2 sides of planning. Actually, I don't like to plan too much. So I would rather look for a country or an area to go. And for me, it's actually the better experience to not really have a plan. I remember 2 years ago when in 2021, when I went to Scandinavia with my girlfriend, pretty much until we were in the car and the bikes on the trailer behind us, she was asking, where are we going now? we just knew that we would sleep over at a friend's place in Germany, and then having another stop in Denmark where we could leave the car and the trailer. And afterwards we said, well, I'm not really sure if we can do the TED, because my girlfriend, she didn't really have a lot of off-road experience. And so I just knew, okay, we will try the TED. I don't know how challenging it is, if she's able to do it. And if not, we'll go on road. So in terms of planning, I really love to watch some YouTube videos to get some inspiration, maybe to map out some highlights on a Google Maps layer or something. Definitely look for some recommendations, but otherwise, if you have some points of interest on your map, we will just go along as it goes. As I said, road conditions, maybe also group preferences, and maybe also weather. So, for example, in Scandinavia, on the Norwegian coast, I think the first 1.5 weeks, there was always rain. So we stick to Sweden for the first half of the trip. And then when it got a little bit better, or when the weather changed, we moved over to Norway. And so I also do ride in the rain, but I also like sunshine. So I think watching out for the weather is not the worst idea.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked a little bit about how you started with the filmmaking, and maybe it was a little bit difficult to start with, and you had to work at the technical side. When you first started making films, and I guess about the time that you started publishing to YouTube, to what extent were you drawing on the work of others? Were you taking not necessarily inspiration, but like really trying to say, I like the look of what that person's doing, I'm going to try and do the same thing. Was that an approach that you took?
Yeah, well, I think a big motivation to even start the channel was watching other YouTube travel videos, predominantly motorcycle adventure travel videos, but not only. And I like probably the cinematic approach. So I really like the high quality content with some included storytelling. So I remember I even took some notes. So some channels which were probably inspirational, maybe from the German side or German speaking channels, are Walle on Tour, or maybe also Erik Peters. But also I watched a lot of English YouTube videos. So Thomas Hansen is probably, I think he was your first guest, right?
He was indeed, yes.
He was definitely a big inspiration, and there's also a lot of parallels regarding bike equipment and so on. So then there's also Adam Riemann, but I also watched some guys called The Story Till Now. He's traveling on a Jeep Gladiator, doing some off-road trails in Canada and the US. So I really liked the videos which were high quality, so not only resolution like 4K, but also mixing different cameras. So maybe having an action camera combined with a drone, combined with a full frame camera. So having different angles and some storytelling, not only a single shot point of view GoPro camera on the helmet. That I think that's just boring. And also what really turns me off is when it's low quality. So when it's very low resolution, I noticed that. Maybe other people don't, but I think 1080 is nowadays probably not enough, and really shaky footage. So those are things which annoy me, and I really appreciate the channels who try to do high quality content, because that's what inspired me.
The first video you published to YouTube, or at least the first one which is publicly available, was posted in October 22. And I'm guessing that you shot the footage in the Northern Hemisphere summer of the same year, so the same summer, 2022.
Yeah, that's correct.
Since then, you've published a further 17 videos to YouTube as we record this. What are the main things that you think you've actually learned about filmmaking since you first started?
Well, some things you only realize when you really see it on the big screen. For example, having the exposure right. If you don't have the right exposure, you can adjust it in edit afterwards to some extent, but then the colors are not really nice. So that's something you realize later. But also probably the most things I learned in this time were really editing. So you try to have some animation, you try to do some color grading, how to do the right cuts, how to cut to music, how to do voiceover. So that took most of the time, is probably learning to do the editing and less time for filming. But also when you did this editing, so I did it, I think, over the winter of 2022 to 2023, I edited the series. And then when you go back to shooting in the next season, you take that knowledge and what to look out for with you, and you will also do better filming afterwards. So I think you have to have a nice cadence between shooting, editing, watching some tutorials, and doing the same thing all over again.
Right. And was that a big surprise for you, how critical the editing was to the whole process, and also how much the editing actually taught you to be a better videographer?
Yes, definitely. First, I really underestimated the time you need to do editing and to learn it. There's also a saying that you really need to shoot for the edit. A lot of people, they tend to shoot for very extended periods of time. And then when you go back editing, you really have to scroll through a lot of footage. But when you already have some picture in mind for the scenes which come up, and that's something you really need to learn. I think I'm still doing nowadays probably some random shoots. So you don't always know what you're going to use in the end, and there's always some trial and error, and you will do multiple shots and not use all of it in the end. But when you have this editing experience, you will definitely use other angle shootings. Also, when you watch then YouTube videos from other travelers and creators, you really notice what they looked out for. So you really see all those filming and editing of others with other eyes, and then you can also learn from seeing other stuff. So it really opens your eyes. Also, when you watch just Netflix series or just a movie, you already see these film techniques with other eyes. So it teaches you really a lot to do all the stuff. But if you don't have a passion for it, you won't stick to it, because it's just so much work and time.
And did you find then that after that first series, after editing that first series in Scandinavia, when you came back to shoot the second series, did you find that you were not shooting as much coverage, not as much footage?
Yeah. For example, if we talk about action cameras, it's a good idea to set a maximum shooting time. For example, you can set it to 1 minute or 5 minutes, but usually it's much less. So sometimes you would even record a 10-second sequence or maybe half a minute. And this time definitely gets shorter. And also, for example, drone shots. Having smooth drone shots is really important to me. I think there's nothing worse than having edgy look in your drone shots or some uneven movements in the camera angle. And this is something you really need to practice and learn. And if you have more experience with that, of course, you will need less tries to shoot the same thing. And so you will also have less material on your SD card in the end. But then maybe you will add other angles you didn't use before because you saw it in some other videos. So I'm not sure if it really was less in the end. So then when you have multiple guys doing on the trip and they are all filming, you end up maybe having 10 different cameras. So not sure if it really got less with the last ACT UK trip.
Yep.
But for those things you film by yourself, I would definitely agree.
Yeah. Well, I was going to then ask you about that adventure on the British Isles trip. When you were on the section 4 of the ACT, on the top of the Misty Hills, and you had a lot of the drone footage following you, I actually think that was some of the most impressive visual footage of the whole series. Did you have a sense at the time how good that was going to come out?
Not really, but the funny thing is, all those clips, they came together first of all because all three of us had a drone with us and were really shooting in, in turns. So most of the time one was going to the front, shooting the other two's coming back. In the meantime, they passed the first guy. He was packing in his drone. The second one was waiting, and another one was going to the front. So really, that scene, that was a mixture, if I remember correctly, of 3 different drones. Then, of course, everyone will use some slightly different angles. That's also a good thing of having 3 guys all having some affinity to video shooting. And the second part is the music. So sometimes you sit in some online library and searching for music, and you try different stuff, and then you put the music beneath the clip in the editing software, and then you start to do some cuts according to the music, and then it all comes together. And I think that was one of the points when I got some goosebumps during the editing, and I think that's probably the most beautiful experience when you get that feeling, and all those things need to come together: the right footage, the different angles, and the music, and then it can create something really nice.
Yeah, well, okay. So it wasn't just me. So you were also knew at the time, as you were editing. Oh, this is actually quite special. This little bit. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Because it was Martin and Andy who were on the trip with you. Did they sort of develop the interest in the filmmaking the same time as you, or is it? I mean, how did it happen? Did you all sort of develop an interest at the same time, or did you develop it first and then they got interested? How did it work?
Probably I would say Martin and Andy, they are into the videography, or probably even more photography. So both of them are more photographers than videographers. Actually, Andy is a professional photographer for the motorcycle industry.
Okay.
So he does shootings for motorcycle brands, for accessory or clothing brands, or motorcycle rallies, off-road events. So he's really a professional, but he's more drawn towards the photography, and videography is more a byproduct for him. But yeah, of course, if you know your camera very well and you do some video shoots from time to time, I think it's not too hard for him to do it in a nice way. And Martin, he's very active on social media for a long time. He did some publications in motorcycle magazines, again, mostly photography, but he did a big trip through Iceland where he did some video recording also on the drone. And he does presentations at motorcycle events, not only showing photos, but also videos. So for both of them, they had some experience with it, probably longer than I did, but I'm really focusing more on the videography. And for me, it's even hard I always say that it's hard for me to do both at the same time, because I think you need to have a different mindset for photos and videos. You also need to have different settings in your camera, and the next thing is different gear. So I'm not sure who is aware about the variable ND filter. That's something you probably will also only need for videography, and there's something like the 180 shutter rule. So having the let's say you're filming in 30 frames per second, then one frame should be 1/60 of a second. So things like that you don't really need in photography, and you will also use different angles. So I like to find some kind of agreements with the guys I'm on tour, who is focusing on what, and then I really did most of the filming in this trip, but they helped me out, and yes, they do have some sense of what also looks nice on video. So they are not beginners, and this really helped me being able to include their shots in my series.
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds really fantastic, because so many of the people I talk to are solo travelers. And when I ask them about traveling with others, they say, well, yeah, I mean, there are friends that I ride with, but those friends will not tolerate the time that takes to do all the filming, setting up, breaking down cameras, riding, to the camera, away from the camera, stopping, turning, it can take a long time. So I think, yeah, you're incredibly lucky to have a couple of friends who enjoy the riding, but also enjoy the process of making the films as well.
But you know what is funny? We were talking about this South America trip, and back then I was traveling with a very good friend, and he was really into photography at that time, and he had probably a APS-C camera with different lenses. I just had the one bridge camera, and he did a lot of stops doing photos, and I was kind of annoyed back then. So at this time, I was probably at a very early stage of being creative in that kind of way, and so I also know the other side. And you also mentioned the Gran Canaria trip. I was there with my fiance's brother, and he's not into photography or videography at all. And at some point, I also realized that he was a bit annoyed by that. So it can go both ways. And yeah, as you said, it's really special finding a group where everyone is interested in spending that time for it.
Yeah. Consider yourself very lucky. One thing that I thought was really interesting, just again on the British Isles series, in episode 3, right at the beginning, you show us a big nail or screw in your rear tire. And this whole drama happens about trying to get the tire fixed, which people can go and watch. But what was really interesting about that episode for me is that suddenly there were 2 parallel stories running. There was your story, and then there was a story of Andy and Martin who were continuing sort of on the more or less the planned route, while you had to divert to, I think, to Liverpool or somewhere to get the tire fixed.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is really different. This is not what we normally see in this kind of, sort of adventure motorcycle tour video, where you have 2 parallel stories running at the same time. And they were good enough to capture some of their trip. And of course, we saw you on the telephone walking around sort of outside trying to get the tire fixed. And so what I wanted to ask you is this, is that, did you see it as a big opportunity as to do something slightly different?
Well, it was really kind of an accident getting a tire puncture. So this was definitely not something we had planned. And I think I was also not in the mood of, telling them, do some nice video recordings. And that's again the nice thing about Martin and Andy. They really did it by themselves. Well, all 3 of us had a GoPro either on the helmet or somewhere on the bike. So, and we set the GoPro to a setting where you simply push the record button. Then I think it takes probably 3 or 4 seconds until it starts recording. And so you can do it easily on the go. And we have some microphones wired to the chin-mounted GoPro. And so this was probably not the hardest thing for them. And then, of course, they did some nice drone shots, but they did it all by themselves. So I didn't have to tell them. And I just thought, wow, they recorded some nice footage and I can't skip it. So then the only thing for me, which was obvious to do, was to have these 2 storylines next to each other's. And it took a little bit of thought how to do it. And you have to have some transitions or like a quick darkening of the screen. Very important is to change the music. So I tried to have some sad music when I showed my helmet camera, and then I switched to some nice, I don't know, fairy tale like music when they rode through those green hills. And what always helps is to have a nice voiceover when you change from one to the other person. Of course, you need to explain that for the viewer to realize now, okay, that's the second storyline now.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it sort of made me sit up and go, oh, this is interesting. This is a little bit different. This is kind of engaging. Talking about before you go off, do you plan any of the videos before you head off? Or do you just go capture stuff? Do you just go and do that? And then when you come back, when you're doing the post-production, when you're doing the editing, that's where you find the story? Is that your approach?
Well, I would say there is not really a script or something like that, but there are some things, you need to think of. So usually when you have a day of riding, it's always a good idea or a good tip to add some stuff where you record yourself or another person from the tip to show some face, to tell some story. And best idea is to do that 3 times a day. So probably in the morning, end of the day, and somewhere in between. Sometimes we forgot to do that, but then at least you have it maybe once or twice per day. And if you skip that, you need to do even more voiceover in the end to tell the story. So I think doing these short face, how do you say, talking head recordings, this really helps to tell the story. And that's also something I learned from the Scandinavia series. I think we only did that kind of interview style recording back then once. And I got some feedback afterwards, you should have done more of that. So, of course, you look out for some things, and you realize then, okay, you need to have some different shots, some action shots, some B-roll shots, some landscape, maybe some close-up shots. So maybe there's not a script or a full-scale plan, but you still have to have an idea of what you're doing. So it's not just random. It doesn't happen all by accident.
A minute ago, you mentioned that you have mics inside your helmets and that they are connected to the chin-mounted GoPros. Can you tell me maybe in a little bit of detail exactly how you're doing that?
So, that's something I would probably also even improve if I would do the trip again, because I think, if I remember correctly, at that trip, I was the only one having probably 3 microphones inside my helmet. So first is the Bluetooth headset, which has a microphone. Then I have the chin-mounted GoPro with the media mod. From the media mod, I have a Y splitter, and this leads to 2 microphones, one going next to my mouth or chin, so on the side of my helmet, and the third one is close to the speaker of the headset. So actually, one is recording my voice and the other one is recording the speaker of the headset. So, and it's still a big challenge to get good audio. So if you're going fast and there's a lot of wind, the audio will be ruined at some point. So the slower you go, the better it is. And I also use the beta version of Adobe Premiere Pro. And there's a tool, I think it's called AI Enhanced Speech or something like that. And so you have to play around with the enhancement level. And actually, I feel like the audio could have been better. And without the enhancement, and I always use subtitles when I do these helmet audios, because I feel like you don't always understand what you're saying. Yeah. So it's better than nothing. And actually, I learned that from Nomad Sweden. I'm not sure if you know the channel. And he has even a tutorial how to mount these microphones the way I did. So, and he also has this in his videos. I think they are even talking a lot of Swedish, and then he also uses English subtitles for that. And I found that quite inspiring. And I also got a lot of positive feedback about the audio. So it really enhances the storytelling, and it gives you the feeling you're with the crew, because you hear like someone is speaking to you in the helmet. So if you have experienced being connected with other riders over the Bluetooth headset, it kind of reminds you of that feeling when you hear the audio.
Can you tell me what microphone you're using in the helmet, the one that you've put in there? Do you know off the top of your head what it is?
Yeah, it's probably overkill, but it's the Rode Lavalier mic. So I think it's like €40 mic.
I know exactly the one you mean. And actually, I would say it's probably not overkill, because, it sounds like a lot of money for a very small microphone, but if you get a cheap microphone, they will behave cheaply, particularly in the wind. But yeah, I've also got something called a bumblebee, which is a type of dead cat, but it's a dead cat that's in a chamber, or the microphone sort of sits in a chamber, and it's isolated acoustically from the outside world, and the outside world has got a covering of a dead cat. But yeah, I'm always kind of interested in what people are doing with the sound and how to get good results. So yeah, interesting.
Maybe some other options I saw is some people use like a DJI mic inside the helmet, like a Bluetooth mic, and other ones. I think there's now also one of the Bluetooth headsets. You're able to connect it with your phone and record it with the phone. But for me, this doesn't really sound practical because maybe my setup is kind of very analog and not very digital, but it's always ready to go because the mic is always connected to the GoPro. So you just need to start recording. And also, if it's very spontaneous, you still have a good chance to record the audio.
Right. Yeah. I guess then also, if you were having to record constantly on your phone, that would probably take up quite a bit of disk space, and then syncing up the audio to the pictures would, in post-production, I mean, it wouldn't be impossible, but it would take a long time, right? Yeah.
No, I wouldn't. Yeah, that would be my nightmare.
Yeah. You mentioned the music when we were talking about the, driving or riding across the misty top of the hills. What comes first when you are doing the post-production? Is it the music or the visuals? So do you find the sequence roughly and then go look for the music, or do you find the music which inspires the sequence?
I always try to improve my workflow. So nowadays I start with a kind of a raw edit. So I just, I don't throw in all the clips. So I already take out the sequence out of the clip, which is, kind of nice sequence. And I just align them all next to each other in the timeline. And then maybe sometimes when I'm doing this, I already have in mind a type of music I want to have. I have a library on my computer, so sometimes I reuse some music. But if I don't feel like I have the right music, I would just go to the online library. So there are different options, but I use the Epidemic Sound. And I think the nice thing is you can also search for a mood. So sometimes I would just search for, I don't know, campfire music, or you search for dinner or sad or epic, and then you can combine different moods and or sceneries. And sometimes you really need to listen for a short time through 20 different music options, and this can take some time. So sometimes you put down the music below the clips, and you even start to edit the clips to the music. And after some time, you realize, no, it's not really clicking, and you try another song and maybe even a third one. But often it also works with the first one. But yeah, it can really happen that you have to try different musics, and that's always the nice moment when you see, okay, the clips and the music, they come together. The second step, and probably in the end, I would add the voiceover after the music.
Right. And finally, before I ask a few questions about, running the YouTube channel, as of today, is there a piece of filmmaking equipment, camera or drone or something like that you feel is missing from your collection of audio-visual equipment, or is there something that you're planning to purchase for the coming season?
No, not really. I mean, I sometimes change the equipment. So, for example, for the last trip on the Channel Islands, I tried a different lens now. It's a 24 to 105 millimeter f.4 lens, for those of you who are aware of that. So I sacrificed the aperture for a broader focal length range. Yeah. And usually before that, I used the 2.8 lens, which is 28 to 75. But sometimes I even took 2 or 3 lenses with me, but most of the time you don't have time to change lenses. So 90% of the time you will use one lens. So nowadays I find it's better to have a broader range of focal length instead of having the best aperture lens. But this is something I might mix over time. And yeah, I mean, if you go off-road, you need to have light equipment and you always have too much with you. But as I said before, I think the most important thing is to have at least one action camera, to have a drone, to have a phone which is able to record high quality phone footage, and maybe a good APS-C or full frame camera, but that's probably optional. So I think Nomad Sweden, they actually record most of their stuff on an iPhone and maybe a GoPro. So if you have a good storytelling, you can definitely skip the full frame camera. But if you have a passion for high quality video, you can do it, and it fits inside my tank bag. So that's probably also a good tip. Have your most important camera ready to touch, even sitting on the bike, maybe. Maybe the Insta360 I bought recently, but I haven't used it that much, so I'm not really sure about that one. It also takes more editing time having a 360 camera.
Yeah, for sure. So I do want to ask a little bit about running the YouTube channel. Like I said, there are 18 videos there now in total. Do you have a sense of what works and what doesn't? Like, what's popular, what gets the biggest reaction? Does the YouTube algorithm make any sense to you at all? Is it something that you concern yourself much about, or are you just happy making films, and if people like them, great. If they don't, that's fine. It's not going to stop you. You're just going to keep making them anyway.
Yeah, well, one thing which was kind of weird is now with the latest series of the ACT UK trip, the first episode got really the most views. I think it was almost 50K, although it's before even starting to go off-road. So that was kind of weird. And I think my fiance's brother, he said, that was a boring episode on the German motorway. But maybe it was related to the thumbnail. I have to admit it was a bit of a clickbait thumbnail when Martin had a crash already on the off-road section. So I also got one comment, well, you should have a thumbnail, which is actually from that episode. But I had the idea to use the same thumbnail for all the clips. So now I try to change thumbnails. I don't really know yet. It seems like always the first episode of a series gets the most views. I'm not sure if this is a YouTube thing or if this is natural. So that can be a bit of a bummer when you you do more and more episodes, but it gets less and less. Yeah,
it's funny you mentioned that. I could list, I think, half a dozen maybe examples of exactly that phenomena where someone, quite often a new person to YouTube, the first thing they put up just goes crazy, and then everything is like 10% or less of subsequently, and in terms of view counts. And it doesn't make any sense at all to me, because usually people's first videos are not very good, and they really get better over time if they persist with it. But yeah, I was really interested to see that you recently posted a poll on Instagram asking about the duration of your videos. Now, I know it was specifically in regard to whether you should split one long episode into two shorter episodes, but what I actually wanted to ask you was, are you targeting a specific duration for each of the films or the episodes or the chapters, as you've called them? What's your thinking about that?
I guess for the first episode, I had something in mind like 20 to 30 minutes, and then it just turned out longer. So I ended up with probably almost 40 minutes, or was it 37? And then the next two episodes got always 1 or 2 minutes longer. And so the first three episodes were around 40 minutes of the current series. And I also got some feedback that for some people this is too long or too much. And actually, Andy, he recommended I could have split the episode number 3 into 2 episodes. So that got me thinking, and I also asked some friends, and I feel like it depends on the age of the viewer. So it seems like the younger generation, they prefer some videos between 10 to 20 minutes. And the older generation, which are more used to TV series or maybe even movies, they prefer, I don't know, maybe 40 to 60 minutes. So it depends on the on the viewer, but in general, I think what works better in terms of views is to have shorter episodes and at the same time have more frequent and more regular updates. And that's something I struggle with because I do have a full-time job, and finding time next to it for the video editing. I think the last 20-minute episode took me 2.5 days. I wouldn't spend the whole day editing because it's basically my time off or my weekend, but I would dedicate a lot of that day to video editing. And yeah, it's hard to find a balance between time off and editing. But yeah, probably 15 to 20 minutes is probably something I would target.
And another question I wanted to ask you is like, okay, obviously English is not your first language, but you do create the YouTube videos for an English-speaking audience. Is that simply an accessible market decision? You want to be able to reach a bigger market, or are there other reasons for that choice?
I think there are 2 or 3 different reasons. So yes, definitely there's a broader audience if you do it in English than in German. I also do have a in German language podcast about adventure motorcycles, and the views are like not even 10% of the YouTube views. So yes, it's also about audience, but on the other hand, I also really enjoy English videos like some of the creators I mentioned, also like Thomas or Nomad Sweden. So I feel like there's even more quality YouTube content out there in English than in German. And as I prefer to watch a lot of that, I thought it's also kind of natural to do it that way. And as you probably noticed, some of the helmet audio is in German, but then I would put down English subtitles. And yeah, I enjoy do it in English, although it might not always sound very natural, but I hope it's good enough.
I mean, do you feel that you're able to express your personality in English? I mean, I'm here in Germany. I'm trying to learn German, and one thing that people say often is that they are frustrated because they can't be themselves in the language, the new language that they're trying to learn. Is that their native language self and their foreign language speaking, German, French, whatever it is, self, completely different things. Particularly if we talk about humor, often people are frustrated to express humor because they don't either have sufficient knowledge of the new language, or they just don't have the words in the new language to be able to express their humor, and humor is sort of a very important part of life, it could be argued. So do you feel that you are able to express your personality sufficiently in English?
Well, I would say also now having the podcast, it's a bigger challenge for me because I can't use like a translator next to it. So there is a little bit of a downside. Of course, my vocabulary in German is bigger than in English, but I don't really feel like it's limiting me, because if I do voiceover on YouTube, I do have the time to look up a word if really needed, but most of the time I don't need it. And as I really enjoy watching English content, it's not like I don't have the feeling I have to do it. I like to do it in English.
Right. Super. Yeah. Okay. I guess I should ask, so what are your future plans or hopes for the channel?
I'm happy if the channel keeps growing. I think the best part of it is getting deeper into the community, building up the network. Of course, there are some advantages now, some collaborations with some companies get going. So sometimes will get some gear for free, or maybe some accessories, or you get something for a reduced price. So, but this is not the reason why I do it. So yeah, it's a passion. But of course, sometimes it's a struggle how much time you should invest. You might miss some other things you would like to do in your free time because of video editing. So it's a trade-off. I don't really know where it's going. I'm also not sure if I will always be able to do it because maybe my personal family situation might change at some point. I don't really know. But as long as it's growing and as long as I enjoy doing it, I will try to keep it going. And of course, I will always try to improve myself in filming and editing. So, yeah, let's see. And what comes next, I will just try to keep it going as long as possible.
You gave some examples of some of the videos that you watched earlier. And I know you have listened to some of the earlier episodes of this podcast. So you know that I always like to ask at the end if there are filmmakers, not just within the motorcycle travel genre, but any type of filmmaker that you've taken inspiration from or have influenced you. And you mentioned Thomas Hansen, you mentioned Nomad Sweden. Was there anyone else that you would encourage others to look at?
Something I just can say about Thomas, I'm still surprised how much effort he puts into his B-roll. So what I don't really do is setting up a tripod, driving by and going back. So that's also a benefit of having two friends with you who like to do some video recording. So that's also the reason why usually you don't see 3 bikes riding in my series, because always one of us is filming. Yeah, I just enjoy high quality content. And like I said, Thomas Hansen, Adam Riemann, Wale on Tour, Eric Peters, The Story Till Now. Of course there are more, but these are like the ones which just came to my mind.
Right, of course, and yeah. And finally, the last question, which I always like to ask my guests, which is, does the filmmaking enhance the pleasure of the motorcycle ride, or does it diminish it?
I would say it enhances the pleasure of the ride, because I think it would be probably more boring to me to just go out riding without recording. It's like a second passion for me.
Thanks so much for being my guest today on this episode, Chris. Other than your YouTube channel, is there anywhere else people can find your creative work online?
Yeah, you can also find me on Instagram. It's the same channel name, chris.moon.travels. And if you do speak German, then also you can find on Spotify or other places my podcast called chris.moon.cast. As mentioned until now, all episodes are German. Maybe I might do some English episodes occasionally. I haven't done it yet. So that's pretty much it.
Great. Well, I'll certainly be keeping an eye on the YouTube channel. Based on what I saw of your Channel Islands trip, I'll certainly be looking forward to seeing those films. So thanks once again for being my guest. Take care and ride safe.
Yeah, Simon, thank you very much for inviting me and having me in the podcast, and really enjoy your work. Keep it going, and would be nice to maybe also meet you in person at some point. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Okay. See you, Chris.
Bye.